In chapter 11, which is do not allow yourself to become deceitful, arrogant, or resentful, it's kind of a summary chapter of everything I've ever written, I would say. I kind of outline the reasons why people become deceitful, arrogant, and resentful. And we have our reasons. It's in some sense, it's a miracle that it doesn't happen all the time. And so I say, well, here's the problem. Death chases you, you're mortal, and illness will be a part of your life and a part of the lives of people you love. And it will be terrible, maybe beyond your imagining. You're stuck with that, man. And culture, there's a tyrannical aspect. It crushes you and turns you into a cog and maybe destroys the best in you to some degree. You're stuck with that. And then Christ, you're just a massive contradictions and trouble. You can't get yourself organized. You're doing all sorts of things you don't want to do and not doing the things you should do, and, putting obstacles in your path just so you can trip over them. Well, there's the landscape. Well, why would you turn to the dark side, let's say, in the face of that? It's like, no wonder, obviously. But it doesn't help. It seems to make everything worse. So, and it doesn't seem, if you're objecting to the fact that things are bad, it doesn't seem that making them worse is a tenable solution. It's an attractive solution at times because people think deeply, oh, to hell with this, it's so awful that I'll just add to the misery out of spite. And man, if you don't see the compulsion of that argument, either you're not, I don't know, maybe you're fortunate. You're sheltered. Maybe you're saint-like. That would be good. But it and you see this in clinical practice all the time. Voluntary confrontation with what is threatening and unknown tends to be curative, and not always. There are mistakes people make. So, for example, you often see these trauma teams rush in to talk to people just after, say, a mass shooting or some kind of terrorist attack, and it does not help people to have them review the trauma that they're currently experiencing. Not unless it's problem-solving oriented. It can just make it worse. But if it's an old memory, well, then voluntary recall and explicit reformulation seems to be useful. Or at least it's better than anything else we know. Well, I would say, the first decision you have to make is whether you want things to be better or worse. And it seems to me that better is a better aim. And if that's what you want, then you can orient yourself to becoming fully on board with that. That's your motif. And I would say that's love in the religious sense, is that love is the desire that all things flourish. And you might think that's evident. It's not evident. This is hard because things are difficult. It's easy to become spiteful and bitter and resentful, and to be self-denigrating and not to work for your own furtherance because you're ashamed of who you are, deeply ashamed, maybe even ashamed to be human. The destructive species that we are, constantly raping the planet, that self-loathing can go very, very deep. So this is hard. But that's the first thing. Do you want things to be better or worse for you and for the people around you? It's so that's your goal, to make them better. Perhaps that's your goal. When I was a clinician, that's what I was always working on with my clients. It was I'm on the side of you that's aimed at making things better. No unconditional positive regard, because there's going to be parts of you that are working at counter purposes to that, and we're not on their side. They're to be judged and dispensed with, not in a contemptuous or dismissive manner, but with the knowledge that those elements of your personality are not serving the goal. And that doesn't mean that might be bringing them on board. So if you're aggressive, that can serve the good. That can make you persistent and committed and immovable, all those things. And then the next thing I would say is, Try not to. Watch for resentment, arrogance, and deceit. They're your enemies. And see if you can reduce the influence they have over your life. And then that's where you have to watch and feel, am I lying? Is this self-serving? Is what I'm saying making me weak? Can I feel that? Am I insisting that I'm right? Because I'd rather believe that I was right than learn. Am I taking revenge in a resentful way? Those are good questions of conscience. It's highly probable that you're doing that in many places. Maybe you can dispense with that carefully over time and see what happens.
And putting our everything into it, because that's where we'll really learn, by giving that endeavor.
Well, that's a good aim. It's a good aim, but you can start with even a little couple of percents of you aim towards that. You can start badly. And that's a useful thing to know too, is like, you can improve your life a little bit at a time. And it's very difficult to be all in. We talked about that earlier. Who knows who you could be if you were everything you could be? That is a limitless case. What would it be like if you stopped doing all the stupid things that you're doing and took advantage of all the opportunities that came your way and aimed at the highest good? Who knows what you could be? You could certainly be more than you are. Everyone knows that, I think, and everyone suffers that knowledge. It's from that. Feelings of inadequacy spring, that can be pathologized too. I know people can be way harder on themselves than is actually good for them. That's not what I mean. It's hard to distinguish between those even, but it can be done, I think. Like if you're acting in your own self-interest, because you're a community that stretches across time, you have to take your own future self into account constantly. And so impulsive selfishness is not useful, even selfishly. And so you can make the most out of yourself, I believe, without taking anything away from anyone else. It's only beneficial. Now, people might be annoyed at you because you're more successful on some dimension than they are, and perhaps that hurts. But, well, if to deal with that, we'd have to eradicate the possibility of ever being better at anyone ever being better than anyone else at anything. And it doesn't seem to me that we want to push equality that far. I'm in terrible pain almost all the time. And I do mean terrible. If in my previous life, when I was healthy, I had ever felt like I always feel now, I would have immediately gone to the emergency ward. But it's not helpful. As far as I can tell, as far as I've been informed for that matter, there isn't anything that can be done about the condition that I'm in. And that's rough. I have to remind myself all the time of what I should be doing, even to continue living for that matter. And I'm constantly reminding myself to be grateful, and as an act of courage. And I do explain that a little bit in Beyond Order. Something I really realized about gratitude is that gratitude at one level is an act, it's a voluntary act of courage. And I'm not trying to make out a case for myself being particularly courageous. That isn't what I mean. I mean that it's a risk to be grateful. It's a decision that opens you up in some ways. And you're sort of grateful despite it all. It's a great gratitude, I suppose, as a marker of faith. And that faith is even, in some sense, belief in the impossible. Despite all this, it's good.